Okay, in lesson 3 we dealt with accents and grace notes, and I demonstrated this in the way that I learnt it when I began learning to drum. But there is a different way of dealing with it, which I find much more complicated, much more mentally challenging. So that's why I haven't used this method. But I wanted to mention this to you in case you find this method more helpful. If you're struggling with the accents and grace notes, if you're finding it difficult to differentiate between the higher stick and the lower stick, then this method may help in that. So this basically comes from a guy called George Lawrence Stone, who is very famous in the drumming world for writing the book Stick Control, which is a brilliant book, and we will be discussing this in a future lesson. But his follow-up to that book is called Accents and Rebounds, and it's kind of his way of dealing with what we've just talked about with accents and grace notes. So basically, in the modern version of Accents and Rebounds, it talks about different sticking, different strokes in order to execute accents and rebounds or grace notes. So you have 4 different strokes. You have a full stroke, which is very much like the open strike, which is starting from a high position and returning to the high position. So that's a full stroke. Then the next stroke is the downstroke. So we start from the same place, but we end in a low position. So it's a downstroke. Now, the third stroke is called a tap. And the tap starts from a low position and ends in a low position. And then the final stroke is the upstroke, which begins from a low position and ends back in the high position. So that's the upstroke. Now that's all very straightforward, but when we put two sticks together, that's when it gets more complicated, and which is why I haven't used this method myself. I prefer to think of the grace notes. Everything is low except the accents. That's my way of thinking. It's a more simplistic way of dealing with the situation. It doesn't involve so much thought power. The thing is, though, if you do make the effort to use George Lawrence Stone's method of the different strokes, then that will pay off. Initially, it's going to be mentally challenging and difficult, but after a while, all of those different strokes will become natural and you won't have to think, and they will become automatic, and then therefore you will have mastered the different strokes. And I think at the end of the day, they both create or produce the same results, but George Lawrence Stone's version, although it's more complex, is probably the better way to go because it's a more thorough way of dealing with the situation. So I'll just demonstrate why it's complicated if we use both sticks. So what we're going to play is 2 accents, 1 on each hand. Then we're going to play 2 downstrokes. That's another 2 accents, so that's 4 accents. So we've got 2 full strokes, 2 downstrokes. That will be followed by 2 taps and then 2 upstrokes. So basically we've got 8 strokes, 4 are accented and 4 are not. So if I just demonstrate that now, so we've got 4, 4, down, down, tap, tap, up, up. So hopefully you can understand that although that is an incredibly thorough way of learning this technique, it's also quite mentally challenging, which is why I didn't demonstrate this to you before. But as I said, if you are finding it difficult to differentiate between the accents and the grace notes, then you may find this method more useful. Okay? Thank you. Yeah, and just to add to that, the reason why it's so complicated is in George Lawrence Stone's book, Accents and Rebounds, there's lots of different accents in different places, and that's what makes it really complicated, because you're always having to think about where your stick is and what's it doing next, as well as should it be an accented note, should it be a grace note or a rebound note, and also what the heck rhythm am I playing anyway after I'm thinking about all these stick strikes. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to belittle the book, I'm just saying that I found it I find that concept very, very difficult to begin with. So there. Cut.